You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 58. My name is Sean Wildemuth, and I'm your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business and the decisions they made along the way. We go way back to their first computer, first code experience, and their first job. We've decided not to have a sponsor for the podcast, but if you want to support the podcast and the kinds of things that I do, feel free to visit my Pluralsight courses at seanw.me/psauthor, including my newest course on building a web app with ASP.NET Core 1.0. We're now in the middle of our road trip covering 25 cities in North America and Europe. We'll be doing live interviews of some of your favorite developers, including Scott Guthrie, Tim Huckabee, and Julie Yak. For more information, see hwroadtrip.com. There you can register for the event in your city. Today's guest is Jim Wooley out of Atlanta. Jim was supposed to be the first guest on the road trip, but I forgot to press record, so we had to catch up with Jim a couple days later and record today's show. By day, Jim Wooley is a consultant for Slalom Consulting. In his free time, Jim is a frequent speaker, INETA Regional Speaker, Microsoft MVP, and co-author of LINQ in Action. He's always striving to stay in the forefront of technology and enjoys the thrill of a new challenge. He's been active in evangelizing LINQ since its announcement in 2005. In addition, he attempts to pass on the insights he has gained by being active in the community, including organizing and speaking at code camps and regional events, including DevLink, DevWeek, CodeMash, CodeStock, VS Live, and Mix. In our conversation today, we get to talk with Jim about his love of music and of development and how they are actually related. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Let's take a listen. Well, I'm excited today to have Jim Wooley. Because this is the second time in a week we've interviewed Jim Wooley, and it's a little embarrassing, but
I didn't see the other version on your website.
There wasn't another version. Ever. Because we had our first stop of the road trip, of the Hello World road trip, and I forgot to press record.
Little speed bump.
Yeah, I looked back at the recorder because I didn't want it to make me look like I was watching the clock or anything. The first show, so I was a little nervous. And I looked back after about 40 minutes, and Jim was on this roll of telling this great story, and I realized that it still said 0 time. In my defense, the button is red when it's not recording. So
it sounds like a user experience problem.
It is. It's been in a box for a year and a half problem with my little Zoom mic. But I'm really happy to be able to get this done. And I'll go ahead and add in crowd sounds later and big applause at the end. And people will think it's really being recorded live.
Yeah. Instead of just being recorded in front of the 3,000 people that we did earlier this week.
Yes. It was a nice crowd in Atlanta.
Yeah.
3,500, 3,000. I don't know what the count was, but it was huge. And we were very funny.
Always.
I don't know whether we will be now, but we were very impressive. So, we're here to talk about how you got started. Mm-hmm. Did you grow up with a computer in the house, or did you get one or have exposure to one in school?
Well, in terms of not trying to show you my age, didn't really have PCs when I was first a child, of course. But we did start having computers around. The first computer I started working with was probably in junior high. And that was a mainframe computer hooking up through a 300 baud modem that used the acoustic coupler, the old phone set that you put down on top of the little receiver thing to actually make the sounds out, and really impressive stuff. About the only thing that system that I remember was able to do was to print mazes. You could tell it how many grid, what size the grid you wanted, and it would print a maze. Really important stuff for the computer world.
And was the maze workable?
Yeah. You would be able to make sure that you were able to work through the maze. So somebody did a little bit of programming on it. I'm not quite sure how much, but
when I was a kid, I had a Commodore 64, and I would always go to Sears where they sold them, and I'd write this one-line program that would display out a maze, but it didn't work. All it did was randomly show left and right slashes, and it would sort of look like a maze if you didn't actually try to do it. So I wondered, whether it was, enough programming to actually make the maze work.
The good old 10 print line, whatever the characters are, colon, go to 10.
Yes. Yeah.
It's amazing actually in Visual Basic you can still do that in visualbasic.net.
I think it was CHR $35.5 plus random. Yeah. And the random was -5 to 1 to 1.5. So it sort of worked. It was kind of crazy because of the rounding.
Mentioning the Commodore 64, after using that mainframe in my first year, and then they get a TRS-80, aka Trash 80, in the school, and then worked with the Apple IICs back in that time. And then we got our first computer at our house. We actually got it because my mother was working on her doctoral dissertation and needed a way to print out her doctoral dissertation and type it up, and didn't really know about computers. So I was able to help her out and understand and teach her how to use the computers and those kinds of things. And so we got a Commodore 64. I think we got it about 2 weeks before it dropped in price from $500 to $100. But really, that was the way I learned how to type. Was both by helping her with her dissertation and by typing in programs from Compute Magazine.
Oh, that's
Compute Magazine was the bomb, because that was really how I learned how to program. I had some computer classes in school and such, but one of the best ways to learn to do something is by having something that doesn't work and then fixing it so that it does.
They would print the corrections to the program like 4 months later. You could just wait.
But even if they printed the correction, you might not type it in right.
That's correct.
And so, you had to make sure that you typed it in. And sometimes it was page after page after page of hex. And you had to type in these hex codes.
Poke.
Yeah,
right?
Poke and peek. And these were actually 01 space 02 space 53 space 89. And then I think it had like 8 sets of numbers and then a 9th number, which was the checksum on the first 8. And so if you missed it, at least tried to catch you. But the only way to test that one was to try to do a poke 49521 or whatever the actual address was, to try to see, okay, what actually happened on that one.
I'm sure Pete Brown knows what the number is.
Oh, he's about the only one probably at this point. But it's actually interesting. Sometimes if you go to presentations that I'll give and, we have to set ASP.NET up so that you use an artificial port number, I'll use 49152 because that was back in the Commodore 64 days, the memory address where you can actually start using extra user space and those kinds of things. So
that's funny. I still tend to use 38411, which is the amount of memory left. Every time you booted it up, you got that same number. Over and over again.
Yeah, and sometimes even if I use the console window in my samples, I'll change the console window so it uses a cyan background with blue text or vice versa. Just because.
That's funny. And so it was your mom wanted to print out a dissertation, so did you get that lovely daisy wheel? Yeah,
we had a daisy wheel, and because of the quality that she had to print the dissertation out, she had to change the ribbon. It didn't use ink at the time; it was a ribbon. The ribbon about every 3 pages.
Wow!
Because of it was an 8-pin dot matrix, but it had to run 3 times across each line to give her the resolution that she needed.
Okay, so it was a dot matrix, not the. I had one of those early daisy wheel that printed. It looked like a typewriter.
Yeah, that's right. It was an 8-pin dot matrix at that point.
Yeah, that was better because you could do graphics at least.
Yeah, and with the Commodore, you wanted that, so you had all those extra graphics characters that you have in the. The crazy things we used to do, but I was talking about how did I start learning how to program? One was by trying to fix those kinds of things. We'll edit that out because I was going to go somewhere and I can't remember where it was anymore.
So I'm curious because I think of you as musician first, developer second, though what order that is may be wrong. Did you do a lot with music on the Commodore? Because I remember, because it was sort of the first polyphonic home computer that I remember.
Yeah, I did some, not a terrible amount, but at that point, this is junior high school. I was not planning on being a computer person. I was planning on being a musician, specifically a music teacher.
Nice.
I started, my first instrument was probably guitar, singing John Denver songs and the Beatles back when I was about 3rd grade.
I'm imagining that now.
Yeah, I'm And then fifth grade started playing trumpet, and by seventh grade fell in love with the jazz band and learned how to do Chuck Mangione, Feel So Good, and I think I can still play that thing actually, and started teaching myself how to play organ. And my whole focus was really about being a music teacher.
Oh, that's lovely.
In summers, I would, instead of going, we lived at that point about a mile away from the beach. So instead of going to the beach for the summer, I actually went up to New York State to go to music camp.
Oh, nice.
And hanging out with a bunch of people. I'm still friends with a lot of them. Think for Facebook and those kinds of things. You're able to connect with some of those kinds of people.
Absolutely.
So it's amazing. But yeah, I was definitely planning on being a musician all growing up. And I don't know that my high school band director necessarily appreciated that I was coming back and telling him how he was supposed to be directing everything. In part, that was because he was a guitarist, a classical guitarist, and never played in an ensemble in his life, and he was trying to teach direct the band and the choir, and so it was a little bit of a challenge.
That's a whole different deal. Yeah,
and of course, the year after I graduated from high school, he left the band program and went to administration instead.
Yeah.
So I'm hopefully he was able to do fine from there as well. But it's interesting where life takes you sometimes.
It is. How do you transition from? I mean, because you went to school and you finished your degree in music education, right?
Yeah, I did in music education, and then I got out of school, and I actually went back and I got a job teaching at the same place I went to junior high.
Wow.
Which was very interesting, being on the other side of the desk from all the other teachers that you had. Seeing some of the idiosyncrasies that you didn't know existed and some of those kinds of things was very interesting.
Wait, so there were a lot of the same teachers?
Yeah, there were quite a number of them that were still the same there. And I also worked with the high school with it was accompanying the school plays and those kinds of things. And so having those experiences, which was wonderful. But
because you're primarily keyboard player.
I did a lot of keyboard and trumpet still, jazz trumpet particularly,
nice.
And church organ. It's a little hard to carry your organ around with you on your back. So I was do singing and those kinds of things as well.
I just figured, anything with a keyboard you were happy with. Is that right?
I mean, since I was all self-taught, and I was self-taught both in the organ and in computers,
for
the most part, right? So I might not have had the best technique in the world, and so I wasn't a great classical pianist.
Sure.
But I still can probably play fairly well, not only with my hands, but also with my feet. I have a couple of pieces that I've played. One year after Easter, when you have all of the big Easter music and such at the church, then the next week I wanted to give my hands a rest. And it was good because I just bought a new chef's knife and cut one of my fingers.
Ow.
But I decided, well, except for the hymns, I'm going to do everything just with my feet alone. And I actually have some pieces that require you to play 6 notes at the same time with your feet.
Wow.
That takes a little bit of work.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
Shoes off in the church?
No, that's shoes on.
That's shoes on. That's
shoes
impressive.
on. Yeah. So
because I was imagining individual toes playing notes. But
no, you got your heel and your toe, and then toe can cover up a couple notes sometimes too. But So I was perfectly fine with playing music, and actually at that time I was doing 4 part-time jobs at the same time. Which is a challenge, and still not making 5 digits.
Yes.
5-digit salary. But I came to learn something about myself. And that was, while I wanted to be a music teacher all my life, I realized I wasn't a disciplinarian. And in trying to teach junior high level, which is a very challenging time for kids anyway, and having classes where they were required to take it but not required to pass it, it made it so certain times there were some kids. I had one time where one semester where the grades ranged from 105 to 15. And the ones who had a 15, well, they did extra credit.
Oh, okay. You can tell I'm not a teacher. Yeah.
And so, but the ones that got the 15 and such, they wanted to make sure that nobody else would be able to learn either. And so, they tried their best to try to disrupt class. And unfortunately, they were successful many times, which not being a disciplinarian in that kind of environment really wasn't a good mix. And I decided after just only a year of that maybe I needed to do something slightly different. And I still wanted to do music. I was still playing around with computers, but music was still my gig. But I love the analytic part of music. And so I decided that I wanted to teach in the college level. I would do music theory.
Nice.
And so I did 2 years of master's work, had my thesis, all but 20 pages of it done. And I already had started 1 year of PhD work on music theory, and then started not believing in my thesis anymore. And B, realized that, there's this publish or perish mentality that's in academia, where if you can't figure out something that about a piece of music that was written 400 years ago that nobody in those last 400 years has been able to figure out, except for you, and then you can write about it. That's what you had to do in order to keep your job. It wasn't quite as rewarding in that regard.
I bet.
I really loved teaching the level where you had kids or students that were motivated to be there. That was what they really wanted to do as well. And so they were, they had that self-motivation, which was really much better.
Yeah.
And, I enjoyed that kind of a thing, but the publish and perish and the, just trying to figure out what can I think about that somebody else hasn't figured out just didn't quite seem as rewarding at that point. So I took a little bit more time off, took a part-time job as a secretary at an agency, and started getting more back in my computer stuff.
Nice.
And at one point, they had a system which I was doing all the data entry for, and it was an old mainframe system again that had been there for 20 years and was due for an upgrade. So I figured, I know how to do some stuff with computers. I'll learn how to create a database that can track the information that needs to be tracked on that, and started that originally with Paradox and threw that away pretty quickly, went with Access, and made sure that I used a version of Access that supported Y2K, because that was starting to come up at the time at that point. And that sort of really got me reinvigorated with what was in terms of computer programming.
Nice.
And so I sort of fell into it to a certain extent.
Sure.
But that particular program that I ended up writing just for this one little agency of a state government organization eventually became adopted throughout the whole state of Indiana.
Wow.
As their main system of record it was job training systems.
Oh, wow.
And so, I got to, go around and consult and train and install, and, it was my baby, and, everybody was using my baby in that regard. And so, really love that. And as part of that, I got to meet this wonderful woman who later became my wife.
Wow.
But at that point, we were living 150 miles apart from each other.
Oh.
So I wanted to make sure that we could actually live together. That might be good. But there really weren't jobs for her where I was, weren't jobs for me where she was. And so we both picked up and moved from Indiana to Atlanta, Georgia, with no job in hand.
Wow.
But
That's
we
gutsy.
knew that there was a lot of tech was down in this area. And actually, we moved here, and within about a week or 2 weeks, I had a job making more money than I never made in my life. It was about $30,000. Realized that it took me 10 years of going through school and things like that and being a musician to actually make 5 digits in a whole year. So 30,000 at that point was really impressive.
Absolutely.
Little did I know, but yeah. Of course, I got this job only having done Access before, and the job was all VB6 and SQL Server. And so I said, I've done this VBA thing. Sure, I know Visual Basic.
It's about the same thing.
Yeah, just about.
Did you find that you had a passion for the development, or for I talk to developers about the different things that about development that entice them, other than the $30,000, which we all agree is an important part of it. But what part of the work, really drove you to want to continue doing this? Because you have a passion, you clearly have a passion for music and for teaching, and in some ways to give that up.
Yeah. I don't necessarily say that I've given it up. I'm not doing as much music at this point, but that's been somewhat conscious because just having the amount of time to be able to put towards, various things.
Absolutely.
But one of the things that I really love about programming and computers is that there's always a new puzzle to solve and a new way to solve it.
Nice.
And so, you learn how to do something one way. And in that first project that I was working on, we were about 3 weeks away from releasing it, and I started reading a programming book. It happened to be Rocky Luck's CSLA book back in the VB6 days. So this is way while
the Bible of VB6 at that point.
Yeah, that was one of them. And it got me rethinking about, okay, the way that we did this, we should completely rewrite this all over again. Because that was the way that we did it before was crap, and this was a much better way of doing things. Sure. Of course, you always experience that.
Absolutely.
If you're a programmer and you don't experience that, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. So I actually took that same program after we released it and rewrote it. Yeah, rewrote large pieces of it, and that sort of took me through the end of the .com boom. And I started getting a little bored at that point, and then the .com bust happened. And I said, well, maybe I should hold on just a little bit longer. And
just
then,
in case.
Yeah, just in case. And then this thing called .net came around. Hey, here's a new hammer and a new puzzle that I can try to solve. So let's go ahead and sort of wait this .com bust out a little bit and go ahead and just rewrite it again. And I did.
Nice.
So I always have enjoyed working with puzzles. The Compute magazine back in the day. I used to do Games magazine also.
I love Games magazine.
Yeah. Not so much on the crossword puzzles and the word stuff, but a lot of the numbers stuff and math stuff. And I really like and get excited by numbers.
Nice.
And it's been one of the things I used to do in high school was I would start with one and add the number together and keep on going line after line after line. And this is what I would do when I was bored in high school. Yeah. And I would get to 40, 50 digits, and I would start to see where numbers start going in patterns and sequences, and almost like the Matrix.
Absolutely.
Interpreting the Matrix in that regard. And so, again, it's the puzzle solving, the learning new ways of doing things. If I ever stopped learning, then that's when I should die, essentially. I mean, you always have to keep learning in order to do things. And
does the work you do these days, does your teaching sort of bug get scratched? That's a really bad but does that get
I'll scratch that itch.
Yeah. Does that itch get scratched by the mentoring of developers that you're working with? Because you work at a consulting company, so you're sometimes working with other people, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're working with developers that are at clients, sometimes other developers for Slalom, right?
Yeah. I mean, it gets scratched not only from helping the other developers that are on our team, but also from a lot of the community involvement that I do.
Because you've been involved in the Atlanta community as long as I've been back in Atlanta.
Probably even longer than that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, when I moved to Atlanta back in '99, I started getting involved with some of the user groups here and started to learn and absorb from them, and then realized that I had something to offer as well.
Absolutely.
And the education and background and those kinds of things really helped me to be able to get that and share that out, and that again fed me emotionally. And one of the best ways of learning is by teaching as well. So I had one IT director at one point who said, you see one, you do one, you teach one. And that's a way of really understanding, because if you want to try to understand a technology, I mean, you can read about it. Yeah, that may or may not actually get you to learn it.
Yeah.
You can do it, and then you'll start to find out where all the nitty gritty bugs are and those kinds of things. You can teach it, And when you teach it, you have to know it a lot better than you ever thought you did.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
one of the best ways I tell people, if there's a technology that they want to learn about, volunteer to do a presentation about it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to learn it a heck of a lot deeper than you ever would. And you're going to have a deadline of when you have to get it done by and actually be able to present it. If you really want to understand how technology works, then you write a book on it.
I'm not sure that either of us would recommend that. But,
but I did find that as I was writing our book that there were times where I said, well, I think I know how this works, so I'll just go ahead and write about that. And then I started thinking, well, this was potentially going to be gospel. Somebody's going to take this and say that this is how it works. And I better be damn sure that that's really how it works. So there were quite a number of times as I was writing our book, LINQ in Action by Manning Press. I was writing about the LINQ to SQL stuff at the time and said, well, I think that this is how this expression tree works. And then I said, well, let me check, and opened up Reflector, and yeah, that's not exactly how it works. So there are quite a number of things where I actually went in there and made modifications because of just making sure that things were really the way it was.
And I bet that changed the way you do development sometimes, because as you're going through, it sort of opened up that world of, okay, the docs aren't the docs, the source code's the docs, right? Especially now that we're sort of edging into open source territory, you can actually look at the actual source code when you're like, they say it works this way, but it's not acting like that. Let's see if it's me.
And there's sometimes where one of the ways that I've learned how certain things work and learned how to do things better to a certain extent is by taking code that other people have written and translating it into a different code base. So
'cause you've done a lot of translation of like the C# stuff into VB.
Yeah. I've done a lot. I did Entity Framework providers, for example.
Nice.
I wanted to learn how Entity Framework was doing some of the things under the covers. This is back in Entity Framework 1.0 days. But when you do that, you want to do it so that it's not just a by rote comparison, but to really understand what's going on under the guts of things.
Absolutely.
And I find that doing the translation like that solves sort of two puzzles. One, it helps me to understand how things work under the covers. And two, it helps give back to the community so that people can be able to benefit from that.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
Most recently, one of the ones I've been working on has been some of the Roslyn analyzers.
Nice.
And I'm volunteering with one of the open source projects called CodeCracker, which they set it up initially to do C# and VB as well. And very few people were actually writing the VB analyzers. And with Roslyn, you actually have to write them different for the two languages.
Sure.
Because just in terms of how Roslyn works differently. So I found quite a number of places where one analyzer works in one way and it works completely different in the other language. And it required me to understand both what one person did in one regard and also what it needs to be done in the other aspect as well. So yet another way of trying to solve a puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, some people start to recognize that, contributing to the community, contributing to open source projects, all of that really helps you become a better developer, not because you're writing more code, but because you're being exposed to sort of new things and you're sort of propping up the whole ecosystem of development through it. When I started working with Richard Campbell has is helping spearhead this Already project. I'll put it in the notes for the talk for the podcast, and it's a open source project that's helping people schedule nonprofits. What was really interesting wasn't the bits. I had been working with ASP.NET Core for a while, and so it wasn't. I was like, oh great, I can help because I know this stuff pretty well, so I can contribute. What was really good for me was that I hadn't worked on a team in a few years. I'd been doing all this teaching, and so I suddenly had like, oh, this is a nice muscle to flex again, of actually working with other people and figuring out how to get them better, not step on other people's toes, or to remember that I'm not the smartest guy in the room usually. All of that stuff that when you sit in your own room for too long, you start to believe the wrong things.
Well, it's a trap that so many of us can often get caught up in terms of either being the smartest person in the room. Then it's really good to be able to work with people who are smarter than you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because otherwise you can get stagnated in what you're doing, and you think that your way of doing things is right. Of course, then again, developers always have this stigma, or not really a stigma, but developers really have this flaw, which is the not invented here syndrome,
Absolutely.
right? So that if I didn't write it, it's crap.
Right.
Of course, we probably have all dropped into that same bucket of, I wrote that 6 months ago. Yeah.
Now that I look at it, there's nothing as ego deflating as looking at your own code from a long time ago.
Yeah, and even so, if it's only 6 months old, it's even worse, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's one of the joys of consulting is you're always jumping around to different kinds of things too. So like my first year working with Slalom, I worked on 18 different projects in that first year. And you jump in on a project, you do it, you jump off, jump into another one, and that's excitement. That's new puzzles, new solving, new tools, and new tool belt, new learning. Of course, there's a challenge with that where you always, by the time you ramp up on one technology, then you have to jump off onto something completely different. 1 week you're working on web forms, the next one you're working on Silverlight, and we're going back a couple of years now, of course.
Yes.
The next
if you're
one,
still working, if you're starting a new project on Silverlight, call me. Let's talk. Okay.
You guys have good training classes on that.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
Jumping onto Angular or Bootstrap or, whatever the new thing is. And sometimes I have to jump back on something that was 3 years ago or more. Probably a couple years ago, I did a small project that was Excel and Access VBA.
Wow.
I've done a project that was using Windows Mobile 6.5.
Wow.
One project actually that did Windows Mobile 6.5 that Motorola created a HTML5 interpreter over. And so they basically ported WebKit for Windows Mobile 6.5, and it worked. Performance on it, not so much.
Wow.
But it was, so we were doing Bootstrap and things like that on a Windows Mobile 6.5 device, so that they would be able to be forward progressing when they decided to move their devices up.
Ouch. That does sound painful, actually. Not as much as, you knew your VBA experience would come back to haunt you.
Yeah.
We all have those skills that never actually make it on our resume anymore. That we're afraid someone will find out we know.
Yeah, I mean, I still, in presentations that I do and my blog posts and things like that, I still do quite a bit of Visual Basic in it, in part because
absolutely.
I know that there are still people out there who are doing it and that need the assistance and need that support. And so that's part of my giving back. For years, I was able to consume things that other people have done and decided that I was going to give back and help others that need the assistance as well. So I'll still do a little bit of Visual Basic in my presentations. Typically, my Roslyn talk, I'm doing a little Visual Basic in it. And usually I'll have one or two people that'll come up to me afterwards and say, thank you, because you're the only person who's done that for these presentations.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody if you're still doing Visual Basic, you have to be a polyglot in terms of knowing other languages as well, right? And there's probably more people that are Visual Basic people that know other languages than there are C# at this point. With the exception of JavaScript, of course.
And that was always the thing with the C# and Visual Basic is that Visual Basic guys could read C#, but the reverse was rarely true.
Yeah.
Rarely true, including including me, right?
Mm-hmm.
There were times when I was consuming Visual Basic and I was like, can't you just accept the semicolons? Because I don't know how not to put them in.
Well, you can do semicolons in Visual Basic. You just put a single tick in front of them.
Yeah, that's 2 characters.
Yeah, well, maybe I should write a Roslyn refactor that'll go ahead and automatically edit that for you.
I think that's a really good idea. Yeah. Just for my talks.
Yeah.
So do you find that doing talks, because I know you do a lot of code camps and you do conferences, and of course you help run a couple of the groups here in Atlanta. When you're actually doing tech talks, do you get that same sort of rush that you did when you were performing music, or is it really a different thing?
I mean, there's some similarities, some differences. It's not, it's sort of similar also to the teaching as well.
Sure.
I mean, particularly if it's a talk.
Teaching.
Yeah, it is teaching, obviously. To some extent, it's on those sessions where you haven't done it before, and it's your first time trying to do it, and feeling, okay, do I have the pacing right, and is this actually going to resonate with people in those kinds of areas? I mean, it's a very different kind of experience than performing. But even with my music, I wasn't so much as interested in the performance aspect of it as I was the analytical aspect of it.
That's true. Yeah.
So my degrees were in music theory for my master's and PhD work, and so instead of trying to figure out how to make this sound the most beautiful, warmest kind of sound, I was always interested in. So how is the major third, minor third relationship affected in this particular composition?
Which is all numbers anyway.
Which is exactly all numbers. I remember reading analysis that people had done on the Fibonacci series and Ligeti's works, for example.
Oh, nice.
And Ligeti was a composer who, if you watch 2001 Space Odyssey, all those atmospheric kind of music that Stanley Kubrick used without permission, essentially. There was a lot of analytics in it, but I really enjoy minimalism because it sort of strips away the pure emotion to the point where you can focus on those things that they're wanting you to focus on. And so that's where I like some of the minimalist kind of compositions.
So like Philip Glass sort of things?
I actually go more towards John Adams.
Oh, okay.
Who's a minimalist. He calls himself at one point a minimalist bored with minimalism.
That's a funny phrase.
Yeah. But I mean, it's sort of let's see how we can continue to evolve and grow and those kinds of things. Just the way that I like to evolve and grow with computer programming, evolve and grow with music. And that's sort of where things progress.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for doing the show a second or fourth or fifth time at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm really hoping that red button means we got it recorded.
I hope so too.
We'll find out soon.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the show. And it's been great, talking to you every single day this week, trying to get this recorded.
Thanks for having me out. And if you need me to do it again, just let me know and I'll be happy to come.
I will. Thanks a lot, Jim. Thanks for listening to the Hello World Podcast. Remember, you can subscribe to the Hello World Podcast at hw